All right, so we're going to hop into the last section of the Cold War here, really rounding this out. However, as we move forward through the information we have left, we will touch on some Cold War things throughout the rest of the chapters. The Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, and so forth. Okay, so the world is living at this point on the brink of war. People live in constant fear of a outbreak of nuclear war. And we see that in schools, kids are drilled on how to get under their desks and protect themselves from a nuclear attack and so forth. We see the development of even more powerful bombs. We see the hydrogen bomb. Both America and the Soviets will get the hydrogen bomb. And it's 67 times more powerful than the bombs that were used in Japan. So what develops here is the policy of what's called brinksmanship. Both the United States and the Soviet Union will push each other to the brink of war, but they know that they cannot push each other to the outbreak of war. It sounds weird, but the fact that we both had nuclear weapons actually develops a system called mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction basically means that we will not go to war because it would end up resulting in the death of both of us. If we launch our nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union, they have time to react and launch missiles back at us. So even if we destroy the Soviet Union with our missiles, their missiles are still flying back towards us, and then what the end result is we're both dead. So if in that situation, it's not a strike first so you can win. It's never strike at all, because the reaction to your strike will cause your own demise. That's what's referred to as the mutually assured destruction, and it's a theory that basically stabilizes and prevents the Soviet Union and the United States from ever going to actual war with each other. We see people are living in fear of nuclear attack. They're building these backyard bomb shelters. When people were buying these post-war homes in the 1950s, it was an option. Oh yeah, I want a backyard bomb shelter built with my with my new house that I'm getting built. Okay, there's a picture of a plan for a do-it-yourselfer. Okay, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. We could go way down a rabbit hole with different details of CIA operations in different countries and so forth. What I want you to get out of this is the fact that the CIA and the United States government, we will work with some pretty shady characters in some countries because we don't want those countries to be communists. Okay, so there might be someone who is a military dictator, there might be someone who's pretty cruel, but we will become supportive of them, at least secretively supportive of them, because we do not want the spread of communism. So we work to overthrow governments that do not ally with the United States or that may be pro-communist. Okay, so a lot of this is taking place in the Middle East. There's a map of the Middle East. We're going to see some in Iran. There's going to be trouble around the Suez Canal here, and so forth. So I'm not going to really get into the details of the conflict with Iran, but what you need to know is America feared that Iran would become influenced by the Soviet Union. So we place a Shah in power that is cruel to his people, and there is really no democracy involved here. But we help support him, and we help get pro-Western oil companies in there. We help get pro-American people in there, and so forth. This leads to the foundation of the fact that Iran still hates us today. Now, I'm not defending Iran. Iran does some horrible things and so forth. But this starts back in the 1950s when we supported the Shah into the 1970s. Okay, it was a short-term solution for us. It prevented Iran from becoming communist, but at the end of the day, we see it as a long-term problem for us today. Guatemala. Okay, it was believed that Guatemala was moving towards a communist country. The CIA overthrows the president and helps install a it helps install a military leader to control the country. Again, civil rights being violated, human rights being violated, but at the end of the day, they're not communists. So Stalin dies 1953. We see Nikita Khrushchev becomes the ruler of the Soviet Union. He is not as hard-nosed as Stalin was. So there's a little bit of a relaxing here. I'm not going to pretend like the Cold War was over all of a sudden, because it wasn't. But at the end of the day, Khrushchev is not as violent or as ruthless as Stalin was. We will see, there's going to be issues, Cuban Missile Crisis, so forth, but we'll talk about more of that later. So we had NATO. The United States had the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was most of Western Europe, America, Canada. So that's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You see them in green there on the map. To answer that treaty organization, we see the Warsaw Pact is formed by the Soviet Union, which is basically the Soviet Union and their Eastern allies. Eisenhower Doctrine. So Dwight Eisenhower, former commander of Allied forces in World War II, is now the president, and he says that we will defend any country, specifically Middle Eastern countries, against the spread of communism. We see an uprising in Hungary. All right, so Hungary is under Soviet influence. Okay, so Hungary is right here, or in Eastern Europe. The citizens want a democratic government, and they want free elections. They want elections that the Russians aren't meddling in, and so forth. The Soviet Union sends troops in to prevent some of these elections. The Soviets overthrow Nagy, who was the premier of Hungary, and he's overthrown, and we see that this is kind of a measuring stick. The United States doesn't respond. We do not send troops in. We do not try to suppress or get involved in this uprising in Hungary. We do not send troops in. We do not try to suppress or get involved in this uprising in Hungary. And we see also another front of the Cold War is going to be the birth of the space race. The Soviets are going to be the first into space, putting the satellite Sputnik into space. That is a replica of Sputnik there. It's about the size of a beach ball with some antennas coming off the back of it. And it floated around the Earth, and it simply transmitted a signal back to Earth, beep, beep, beep. But this sends shockwaves through America. How did the Soviets beat us to space? How were they ahead of us in the space research program, rocket research program, so forth? And the belief was if you could get satellites in space, you could attack your opponent from space. You could shoot down missiles from space and so forth. So in response to Sputnik, we see the United States creates NASA, and we begin to play catch up here. Huge investments in scientific research, engineering, math, so forth. It goes all the way down into the high schools, and they're spending tons of money for math science teachers so that we get engineers and literally rocket scientists out of this. And this will eventually evolve into the United States going to the moon. All right, so that's the groundwork of the Cold War. We covered a lot of the stuff from the 1950s, but it's going to extend into the Vietnam War. Russia's going to get in the Afghan War. The space race continues, and the rivalry will continue. We have the Cuban Missile Crisis coming up. This rivalry will continue, but you got through these couple sections here, you got the beginnings of the Cold War and the groundwork of the Cold War.